You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, like engineering almost.
Right.
You break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line, the doctor points right to it and says, "There it is, that's the problem." Broken or not broken, it's clean.
Yeah, it's comforting. I mean, human beings are completely hardwired to categorize things. We really want a clear villain, a clear solution, a binary reality.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of, say, neurodevelopment or autoimmune diseases, and suddenly that X-ray machine is just useless. You're staring into these incredibly murky waters, trying to find patterns in the chaos. And I really think that shift from expecting a clean binary X-ray to suddenly staring into murky, interconnected waters is, well, it's the only way to accurately look at global affairs right now.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. And that is exactly what we're wading into today on this deep dive.
Yeah, because we've been poring over this massive stack of intensive current affairs briefings from May 2026. Specifically, we've been looking at some really detailed analysis from Vajiram and Ravi, as well as the historical and political context provided by jobs preparation with Sir Talker. And our mission today is to cut through the noise for you. We aren't just going to sit here and read the headlines of what happened.
No, because that's not helpful.
Right. We are going to map the actual architecture beneath those headlines.
Because if you just look at these events in isolation, they seem completely disconnected from one another. I mean, we have tectonic diplomatic shifts in West Asia, advanced drone warfare in South Asia, a massive socioeconomic crisis driven by the drug trade, fierce constitutional battles over how a democracy appoints its guardians, and massive breakthroughs in metabolic biology.
It honestly sounds like five entirely different worlds.
On the surface, yeah.
Yeah.
But beneath the surface, they are all symptoms of the exact same phenomenon. Old paradigms failing and incredibly complex new systems trying to take their place.
Okay, well, let's unpack this. I want to start on the geopolitical stage because the briefings highlight a massive and honestly pretty unexpected shift in high-stakes diplomacy. We are looking at South Asia stepping up as a primary peace broker for the conflict in West Asia. Specifically, the historic Islamabad peace talks that took place on April 11th and 12th of 2026.
The fact that these talks occurred face-to-face in Islamabad is highly significant. I mean, Pakistan stepping into the role of mediator between the United States and Iran represents a major repositioning of regional influence.
And what caught my attention wasn't just the location, but, who actually showed up. We see this all the time. Countries say they're holding peace talks and they just send some mid-level envoys to shake hands for a photo op. That is not what happened here.
Not at all. The composition of a diplomatic delegation tells you exactly how serious the negotiations are.
Right. So the United States delegation was led by Vice President J.D. Vance, and alongside him were Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And on the other side of the table, Iran didn't just send diplomats. They sent the Speaker of their parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and their Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi.
Let's break down why those specific names matter. Because when the U.S. sends the vice president and highly influential inner circle figures like Kushner, it's a glaring signal. It means the executive branch is deeply personally invested in an immediate resolution. They aren't outsourcing this to career diplomats who might, spend 6 months just arguing over the shape of the table.
I want a deal done yesterday.
Exactly. And on the Iranian side, bringing the Speaker of the Parliament alongside the foreign minister is equally telling. A foreign minister negotiates a treaty, sure, but the Speaker of the Parliament has to actually sell that treaty to the domestic legislative body.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, it indicates Iran is looking for terms that can survive their own internal political scrutiny. They are trying to build a ratifiable agreement, not just a theoretical one.
The theme of the summit was, we want peace, not pieces, which, you have to admit, is top-tier diplomatic branding. But the international reaction to Pakistan pulling this off is what really surprised me. Former Italian Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni and internally the Punjab Assembly have actually pushed to nominate Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif and Army Chief Asim Munir for the Nobel Peace Prize for this mediation.
Which underscores the sheer desperation of the international community to stabilize West Asia. And to understand why a former Italian Prime Minister cares so deeply about peace talks in Islamabad, we have to look at the physical geography of the conflict. We have to look at the choke points.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
For you listening, if you don't have a map in front of you, the Strait of Hormuz is this incredibly narrow strip of water sitting right between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. It is literally the jugular vein of global energy.
At its narrowest, the strait is only about 21 miles wide. But the actual shipping lanes? The deep water where massive oil tankers can safely travel are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
2 miles? I mean, that's nothing.
It's a needle's eye. And a significant percentage of the world's total oil consumption passes through that 2-mile gap every single day. So when tensions boil over in West Asia, that strait becomes the ultimate leverage point. The briefings detail a resolution presented to the UN Security Council by Bahrain, attempting to mandate the full reopening of the strait.
And this is where the global fault lines just crack wide open. That UN resolution was vetoed by Russia and China. Meanwhile, Pakistan and Colombia abstained from the vote entirely.
The abstentions are key here.
Yeah, let me stop you there because the Pakistan abstention really fascinates me. On one hand, they are hosting these monumental peace talks between the U.S. and Iran in Islamabad. On the other hand, they abstain from a UN vote that would force the strait open. That is a massive diplomatic tightrope to walk.
It is a calculated move of strategic ambiguity. Think about it. If Pakistan votes to force the strait open, they immediately alienate Iran, which instantly kills their leverage as an impartial peace broker in Islamabad. By abstaining, they preserve their mediating position even if it allows the economic pain of the closed strait to continue temporarily.
And the economic pain is severe. While all this voting and abstaining is happening at the UN, Iran has instituted a very specific physical policy at the strait. They're allowing a maximum of 15 ships a day to pass through. And they are levying a $1 per barrel transit tax.
Now, a $1 tax on a barrel of oil might sound trivial to the average person, but when you combine that tax with the severe bottleneck of only 15 ships a day, you don't just have a regional political flex, you have an economic shockwave that propagates to every single continent on Earth.
Because it's not just the dollar tax, it's the scarcity. If only 15 ships get out, supply plummets, and the base price of the oil skyrockets everywhere.
Precisely. And this leads us to one of the most crucial economic concepts in the briefings. The K-shaped recovery, or in this context, the K-shaped economic shock.
Okay, yes, the K-shaped economy. Let's really spend some time on this because it explains so much about why the world feels so fractured right now. We always hear about recessions as a single entity, like the economy is down. But the K-shape means the economy isn't just one thing, right?
That's correct. Imagine the letter K. You have a vertical line on the left. From the middle of that vertical line, one arm shoots sharply upward and the other arm shoots sharply downward. In an economic shock like a massive spike in global fuel and fertilizer prices caused by a blocked strait, a K-shaped reality means different demographics experience completely divergent outcomes from the exact same event.
So let's break down the arms of that K based on the data in the sources. Let's start with the top arm, the high-income households.
For the wealthy, a spike in fuel prices is just an annoyance. It is a line item on a budget that easily absorbs it. The data shows that high-income households are spending 20% more on fuel, but their actual physical consumption has barely changed at all.
So they're paying the premium, they're shilling the tank of the SUV, they are still taking the flights. Their lifestyle does not alter. The top arm of the K continues upward or just stays completely flat.
Exactly. They have the disposable income to act as a buffer. But then we look at the middle of the K, the middle-income households. This is where the friction really begins to show up in the data.
Right, because the briefings note that middle-income households are seeing their spending on fuel increase by 17%. But despite spending all that extra money, their real consumption has actually dropped by 5%.
Think about the mechanics of that. They're paying more money just to acquire less of the resource. To make the math work, they have to reallocate funds. They cancel the family road trip, they delay buying a new appliance, they start carpooling. The financial stress is tangible, but they are still managing to keep their heads above water by cutting their discretionary spending.
But then we hit the bottom arm of the K, the low-income households. And this is where the numbers stop being just data points and start becoming a description of genuine human suffering.
Yes, low-income households are spending 13.33% more of their income on fuel. And remember, this is a demographic that has zero disposable income. Every single dollar is already spoken for. To absorb that 13.33% increase, they are forced to cut their real consumption by a staggering 7%.
I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this, because they aren't cutting out vacations or new TVs like the middle class. When a low-income family cuts consumption, what are they actually cutting?
They're cutting absolute essentials. They're buying less food. They're keeping the heat lower in the winter. And crucially, if we are talking about rural economies, it means a small-scale farmer cannot afford the diesel to run their tractor or the petroleum-based fertilizer to grow their crops.
Wait, fertilizer, let's trace that out. How does a bottleneck in the Strait of Hormuz hit a farmer's fertilizer?
Most modern commercial fertilizers, particularly nitrogen-based ones, are manufactured using natural gas and petroleum products.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. When the price of oil spikes, the cost of manufacturing fertilizer spikes globally. So the farmer plants less, or they yield less, which means the global food supply drops, which means food prices spike.
Which hits that exact same low-income family a second time at the grocery store.
Precisely. The K-shape becomes a self-reinforcing cycle of inequality.
So what does this all mean for us? We have billionaires and political elites brokering peace deals in guarded, air-conditioned rooms on one side of the globe. Meanwhile, a working-class family thousands of miles away is paying more money just to put less gas in their tank and paying more for the food they put on their table. It's like the global economy is this massive shock absorber, but it only works for the people who can afford the luxury model. Everyone else just feels their teeth rattle every time the geopolitical vehicle hits a pothole.
That is an excellent analogy. The wealthy have shock absorbers, the poor are bolted directly to the axle. And what the briefings point out is that this is not a new phenomenon. We saw this exact same K-shaped disparity during the COVID-19 lockdowns and again during the 2022 Russia-Ukraine energy shock. You only look at the macroeconomic numbers, the gross domestic product, the stock market indices, it looks like the global economy is recovering. But those aggregate numbers completely hide the reality of the bottom arm of the K, where poorer demographics and, frankly, entire developing nations are being forced into severe austerity.
It is a really sobering reality check on how interconnected and fragile the whole system is. But while we are talking about Pakistan positioning itself as a peacemaker on its Western front with Iran, the briefings pivot to detail a completely different, incredibly aggressive reality on Pakistan's eastern border with India.
We are looking at a monumental paradigm shift in India's military doctrine over the last year. We are moving away from a historical posture of restraint toward what the analysis defines as a policy of zero tolerance regarding cross-border terrorism.
Right, and to understand why an entire nation's defense doctrine shifts, you have to look for the catalyst. The briefings pinpoint April 22nd, 2025. There was a tragic terror attack in the Pahalgam region of Jammu and Kashmir, resulting in the deaths of 26 civilians. This was the breaking point.
To appreciate the magnitude of this shift, we have to look at the old playbook. Historically, India operated under a doctrine of reactive restraint.
Why restrain? I mean, if a nation is attacked, why hold back?
Because of the nuclear overhang. Both India and Pakistan possess substantial nuclear arsenals. For decades, there was a profound institutional hesitancy in New Delhi to escalate any conflict militarily out of the very rational fear that a conventional skirmish could accidentally trigger a nuclear exchange.
So the default response was always diplomatic, building international pressure, submitting these detailed dossiers of evidence to Pakistan, demanding they arrest the perpetrators, and trying to isolate the terror groups financially.
Exactly. It was a slow, methodical, and often frustrating process. But the Pahalgam attack shattered that paradigm. The new baseline, the offensive-defense doctrine, is that cross-border terrorism is no longer treated as a law enforcement issue to be solved with dossiers. It is treated impartially and definitively as a direct act of war.
And the manifestation of that new doctrine happened exactly 2 weeks later, Operation Sinandar, May 7th, 2025.
Let's dissect Operation Sinandar because it reveals the new technological theater of modern warfare.
The timeline is what really stuns me here. India launched a massive coordinated strike at 1:05 in the morning, and the entire operation lasted just 23 to 24 minutes. In less than half an hour, they struck 9 terror camps deep inside Pakistan, hitting locations like Muridke and Bahawalpur.
Now, conducting a deep penetration strike on multiple targets simultaneously in 24 minutes requires a level of technological orchestration that is almost hard to fathom. And crucially, India achieved this relying heavily on indigenous technology, leaning into their Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliance initiative.
Let's talk about that tech, because usually when we hear about precision strikes, we just assume the military is using GPS. But India didn't use the American GPS system for this. They used Navis. What exactly is Navig, and why wouldn't they just use the standard global GPS everyone else uses?
This is a vital strategic point. GPS, the Global Positioning System, is owned and operated by the United States military. If you are a sovereign nation relying on a foreign country's satellites to guide your missiles, you have a massive vulnerability. In a geopolitical crisis, the owner of that system can degrade the signal in your region or deny you access entirely, rendering your precision weapons effectively blind.
Oh, wow. So if the U.S. didn't approve of the strike, they could theoretically just turn off the targeting system.
Precisely. To ensure absolute operational autonomy, India developed its own regional satellite navigation system, MAVIC, or Navigation with Indian Constellation, and the technical specifications mentioned in the briefings are astounding. NAVIC provided positional accuracy of 10 to 20 centimeters for the strikes during Operation Sinandor.
Wait, stop. 10 to 20 centimeters? That's literally the size of a dinner plate. From satellites orbiting in space, how is that physically possible?
It works through a constellation of geostationary and geosynchronous satellites that constantly broadcast highly precise timestamp signals. The receiver on the weapon picks up signals from multiple satellites simultaneously. By calculating the microscopic differences in the time it takes each signal to arrive, the system triangulates its exact position on Earth. Achieving 10-centimeter accuracy means the atomic clocks on those satellites and the algorithms processing the atmospheric interference are functioning flawlessly.
It's basically threading a needle from the stratosphere. And I guess that accuracy is necessary because if you miss by 50 meters, you might hit a civilian structure, which instantly escalates a targeted strike into a full-scale war.
Exactly. Precision is the currency of modern deterrence. Alongside NAVIC, the operation utilized swarms of kamikaze drones and the indigenous Akash surface-to-air missile system to protect Indian airspace.
And the briefings do impartially report that Pakistan responded. They launched their own drone and missile attacks, attempting to target Indian military bases, and even intercepted a projectile near Sirsa, which is close to Delhi. But the Indian multi-layered air defense reportedly neutralized the incoming threats.
What is particularly noteworthy in the analysis is the reported failure of Pakistan's HQ-9 air defense system against the Indian swarm attack.
Why did it fail? Is the HQ-9 just a bad system?
It's not necessarily a bad system, it's an issue of mathematics and sensory overload. Traditional air defense systems are designed to track and intercept large, fast-moving targets like fighter jets or ballistic missiles. A radar paints the target, a computer calculates the trajectory, and an interceptor missile is launched. But what happens if you don't send one large missile? What if you send 40 small, low-cost, loitering drones all at once?
The system just panics.
It saturates. The radar can't distinguish primary threats. The computer's processing queue overloads. And even if it could track them all, it would cost millions of dollars in interceptor missiles to shoot down a few $100,000 worth of cheap drones. The swarm economics defeat the defense mechanics.
Which is the perfect segue to the most recent technological leap detailed in the May 2026 briefings. Exactly 1 year after Operation Sinandar, on May 7, 2026, India successfully tested the Tara glide weapon. TARA stands for Tactical Advanced Range Augmentation.
The TARA system is a complete masterclass in military economics and aerodynamics.
Okay, break this down for me, because what is the difference between a traditional missile and a glide weapon?
Think about what a traditional missile actually is. It is essentially a flying tube of explosive fuel. To carry a heavy warhead hundreds of miles, you need a massive propulsion system, a jet engine or a solid rocket motor. That engine makes the missile incredibly expensive, very heavy, and very hot, meaning it shows up easily on infrared sensors.
So it's basically a highly explosive, very expensive Roman candle.
Right. TARA completely flips that engineering logic. TARA is not a missile. It is essentially a conversion kit. It takes a standard, unguided, dumb bomb, which is cheap and plentiful in any military arsenal, and retrofits it. You strap a sophisticated, yet relatively low-cost tail kit containing a NAVIC guidance system to the back of the bomb. And crucially, you attach a set of aerodynamic pop-out wings to the body.
So you turn a falling rock into a paper airplane.
A highly lethal supersonic paper airplane. When an aircraft drops the TARA weapon from a high altitude, no engine ignites. Instead, the wings snap open. The weapon uses gravity to generate initial speed, and the wings generate aerodynamic lift. It simply glides to the target.
That is incredibly clever.
It is brilliant because it removes the propulsion system entirely. It makes the weapon lighter, infinitely cheaper, and because there is no burning rocket motor, it leaves virtually no thermal signature. A radar operator looking for the massive heat plume of a missile won't see it coming. Furthermore, an aircraft can drop it from a standoff distance safely outside the range of the enemy's anti-aircraft missiles and let it glide silently for dozens of kilometers with that 10-centimeter precision.
Here is where it gets really interesting to me. I'm listening to you explain the aerodynamics of this glide weapon and the swarm logic of the drones. It's resourceful, it's cost-effective. But if both sides are replacing the slow, deliberate work of diplomacy with hyper-fast drone swarms, cyber attacks, and silent smart gliders, aren't we just trading a slow political game of chess for a high-speed video game where the stakes are actual human lives?
If we connect this to the broader geopolitical picture, it proves that the very definition of deterrence has evolved. For 50 years, deterrence meant mutually assured destruction via nuclear weapons.
The threat was, if you attack me, we both end the world.
Right. But the nuclear overhang is almost too big, too apocalyptic, to be useful in a localized skirmish or a targeted anti-terror operation. Nobody is going to launch a nuclear weapon over a border skirmish. So, deterrence today isn't about the threat of total annihilation. It's about having hyper-precise, indigenous, low-cost technologies that can dismantle an opponent's infrastructure instantly, without ever crossing the nuclear threshold. It's a new, highly calibrated language of force.
And the briefings point out that this new doctrine isn't just about weapons. India even kept the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance during these tensions. Water, arguably the most vital, life-sustaining resource in the entire region, became a strategic lever.
Yes. However, it is vital to note that the analysis impartially highlights significant ongoing fault lines in this security apparatus. A glide weapon does not solve everything.
Right, it's not an impenetrable dome. The sources specifically point to intelligence failures. They reference a bomb blast near the Red Fort in Delhi,
Which indicates severe gaps in actionable intelligence and a lack of seamless coordination between civilian law enforcement and military agencies. You can have the most advanced satellites in the world, but if human intelligence on the ground fails, you are deeply vulnerable.
There is also the reality of the line of control itself. The terrain is brutal, mountains, forests. The briefings note that smart fencing is less effective there, allowing for continued physical cross-border infiltration.
And crucially, the briefings stress the dire immediate need for a dedicated cyber command. During and after Operation Sindoor, Indian civilian and military infrastructure faced intense, coordinated cyber attacks originating from Pakistan.
Because the retaliatory strike isn't always a missile, sometimes it's a piece of code that shuts down a power grid or a hospital.
Exactly. The recommendation in the analysis is to build an integrated defense cyber agency with both offensive and defensive capabilities. You cannot fight a 21st century multi-domain war with a 20th century siloed institution.
So we have these nations spending billions of dollars, building massive air defense networks, launching their own satellite constellations, and developing silent glide weapons to protect their borders from the sky. But when you turn the page in these briefings, you realize that while you can watch the sky with a satellite, a country might be entirely vulnerable to a slower, much more insidious cross-border invasion happening right in the dirt.
We are transitioning from the high-tech, external theater of war to a devastating internal socioeconomic front. The drug menace, specifically focusing on the Indian state of Punjab.
The scale of this crisis is staggering. It's not just a localized law enforcement issue anymore. The Chief Justice of India has explicitly raised alarms, stating publicly that the situation is going out of hand. And when you look at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime report from 2020, India had the fourth highest opium seizures globally. They confiscated 5.2 tons.
And the trajectory has only steepened since then. More recent data from the Narcotics Control Bureau, the NCB, shows that between 2022 and 2024, they seized over 21 lakh kilograms of drugs.
I tried to visualize that. 21 lakh kilograms. That is literally a mountain of narcotics intercepted. But what truly breaks your heart in these briefings are the demographics of the addiction in Punjab. 76% of opioid dependents are between the ages of 18 and 35.
The absolute prime of their productive lives.
Yes, and 56% of them live in rural areas. Now, listen to this breakdown of professions among those suffering from addiction because it completely shatters the cinematic stereotype that drug abuse is just some urban recreational partying issue. 21% are farmers, 27% are unskilled laborers, 14% are transport workers.
To understand why a 25-year-old farmer or laborer is turning to severe opioid use, the briefings analyze both the macrogeography and the microsocioeconomics. Let's start with the geography. India is highly vulnerable simply because of where it sits on a map.
Right, it's sandwiched right between the two largest illicit drug-producing regions in the world.
To the west, you have the Death Crescent, comprising Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Afghanistan historically produces a massive percentage of the world's illicit opium. To the east, you have the Death Triangle, made up of Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand.
So the physical geography makes the country a natural transit hub for smugglers trying to move product across the globe.
It makes it a transit hub, yes.
Yeah.
But the socioeconomic despair is what turns a transit hub into a final destination.
That is a brutal truth. The Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment reported that 60% of addicts are from economically disadvantaged sections. We are talking about people dealing with intense financial stress, a complete lack of upward job mobility, and profound, untreated mental health struggles.
It's self-medication on a societal scale.
Think about the demographic dividend we always hear economists talk about. This idea that having a massive young population is going to supercharge the economy for the next 50 years. But if a quarter of the people suffering from addiction are the very farmers and laborers who are supposed to be the engine of that growth, this isn't recreation. This is self-medication. This is an escape from economic despair.
Which raises one of the most important questions in the entire briefing stack. Can you ever solve a deeply rooted public health and socioeconomic crisis with a purely law enforcement approach?
Historically, that's what governments try, right? You just make the penalty harsher. The briefings detail the NDPS Act, the massive federal law that controls drug production and trafficking. We have the NCB, the Narco Coordination Center, specialized anti-narcotics task forces. We've even set up Telemana as a toll-free psychological support line. But despite all those task forces, we seized 21 lakh kilograms. It clearly hasn't been enough to stem the tide.
Which is why the massive shift in state policy happening in Punjab in 2026 is so critical to analyze. The state government has seemingly recognized that punitive, reactionary measures alone are failing. You can't just arrest your way out of despair, so they're launching a first-of-its-kind, massive socioeconomic and drug census.
The scale of the census is wild. They are surveying 65 lakh families. They have deployed 28,000 staff members across the state and allocated a 250 crore budget to complete this mapping in 3 months.
What's vital here is the methodology. They're not just knocking on doors, counting addicts, and handing that list to the police. They are actively mapping the socioeconomic vectors of the addiction.
What does that look like in practice? Like, what are they asking?
It means asking questions about household income, educational attainment, generational debt, and access to healthcare. They are trying to prove, with data, that poverty, joblessness, and educational failures are the true root causes of the disease.
So instead of asking who is using the drug, they're asking, why is this village so hopeless that the drug became the only escape?
Exactly. This represents a visible structural shift from enforcement to targeted rehabilitation and evidence-based policymaking. They are finally looking at the root of the rot rather than just treating the symptoms.
It's a monumental undertaking, but it points out a harsh logistical reality. Tackling a crisis like the drug menace with the 250 crore census, or modernizing an army with indigenous glide weapons, or weathering a K-shaped global economic shock. All of this requires a state that functions efficiently.
It requires revenue, and it requires legitimate functioning institutions.
Right. It's easy to look at the drug crisis in Punjab and say the state needs to do more, but doing more requires massive funding. Which brings us to the most unglamorous yet absolutely vital mechanism of a functioning government: how it taxes its people and how it protects its democratic processes.
Let's begin with the economic engine of the state. The briefings provide a detailed update on GST 2.0, the evolution of the goods and services tax framework.
For our listeners who might not breathe tax law every day, let's give a little context. The original GST was brought in by the 101st Constitutional Amendment. Before GST, doing business across state lines in India was honestly an administrative nightmare. Every state had its own entry taxes, octroi, sales taxes.
It was a cascading web of taxation where you basically paid tax on top of tax. The 101st Amendment replaced that chaos with one unified national system, introducing the CGST for the center, SGST for the states, and IGST for interstate trade. It allowed for an input tax credit, meaning businesses could deduct the tax they paid on raw materials from the tax they owed on the final product, completely preventing that cascading effect.
Okay, so that was GST 1.0. But the new GST 2.0 reforms detailed in the 2026 briefings are about radical simplification of the rates themselves.
Previously, the system relied on a highly complex four-slab structure. You had 5%, 12%, 18%, and 28%, depending on how essential the government deemed the item. The GST 2.0 reforms collapsed that down into just two primary slabs.
So we now have a 5% rate for merit goods. These are the absolute essentials needed by the middle and lower classes, and an 18% standard rate for the vast majority of other goods.
To balance the revenue loss from simplifying the middle, they instituted a heavy 40% demerit rate on luxury items and sin goods like tobacco and high-end vehicles. Conversely, they created a nil-rate zero tax on absolute human essentials, things like paneer, unpackaged Indian breads, and crucial services like life and health insurance.
The real-world impact of this restructuring is massive, particularly for that middle arm of the K-shaped economy we talked about earlier. Consider the tax cut from 28% down to 18% on consumer goods like air conditioners, televisions, and small cars.
That is not just a statistical adjustment. A 10% drop in tax dictates whether a family can actually afford to pull the trigger and buy their first car or put an AC in their home before the summer heat hits. It directly stimulates consumer demand, which in turn stimulates manufacturing and job creation.
But what I find fascinating is the underlying power dynamic of how these rates are decided. The government doesn't just wake up and declare a new tax rate. It has to go through the GST Council.
The GST Council is a master class in constitutional mechanics. It is chaired by the Union Finance Minister, but the voting power is fundamentally split to prevent dominance. The center holds 1/3 of the total voting power. The states collectively hold 2/3 of the voting power.
And a decision requires a 3/4 majority to pass.
Precisely. Let's do the math on that. Because the center only has 33%, they cannot dictate terms or pass a tax hike without the support of a significant number of states.
The states only have 66%. So even if every single state in the country banded together to lower a tax, they still fall short of the 75% needed without the center's agreement.
It is a mechanism that legally forces compromise. The center and the states are handcuffed together in the economic steering of the country. The briefings call this the ultimate functional example of cooperative federalism.
It is a delicate, elegant balance of power. But, while the economic engine seems to be finding a cooperative balance, the briefings highlight a severe, ongoing friction in the Democratic engine. We are talking about the massive constitutional controversy over how the Chief Election Commissioner, or CEC, is appointed.
This is a fundamental tug-of-war over the separation of powers. The Election Commission is the referee of the world's largest democracy. Who gets to appoint the referee is a question of supreme importance.
Let's wade into this because the background here is crucial. The conflict revolves around a 2023 Supreme Court judgment known as the Anoop-Barenwal case. What did the court say?
In that landmark judgment, the Supreme Court stated that the process of appointing the CEC was flawed. Historically, the executive branch, the government in power, had immense influence over the appointment. The court argued that to ensure absolute neutrality and independence, which is vital for a referee to be trusted by all players, the CEC must be appointed by a balanced, multi-partisan committee.
And the court mandated the exact makeup of that committee. They said it must consist of 3 people: the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition in the Lok Sabha, and the Chief Justice of India.
The underlying logic was structural balance. You have the head of the executive branch representing the current mandate, the leader of the legislative opposition representing the minority voices, and the highest judicial officer in the land representing strict, neutral, constitutional adherence.
It sounds incredibly fair, but Parliament didn't let that stand?
No, they didn't. Parliament utilized its constitutional authority under Article 3222, which explicitly grants the legislature the power to enact laws regarding the appointment of the Election Commission. They drafted and passed a new election appointments law.
And this new law fundamentally rewrote the Supreme Court's committee. It kept the Prime Minister, it kept the Leader of the Opposition, but it completely excised the Chief Justice of India. In the CJI's place, the law inserted a Union Cabinet Minister who is directly nominated by the Prime Minister.
And this is where the profound constitutional friction arises. The Supreme Court expressed grave concerns over this new configuration. Their argument is that replacing a neutral judge with a cabinet minister inherently creates a tyranny of the majority within the selection committee.
Right. Let's think about how that vote goes. If the committee is the PM, a cabinet minister chosen by the PM, and the leader of the opposition, the Prime Minister and their own cabinet minister are naturally going to vote together. The executive branch automatically has a baked-in 2-to-1 advantage before the meeting even starts.
That is precisely the Supreme Court's argument. They argue that excluding the judiciary and stacking the deck with the executive weakens the institutional independence of a vital public office.
It goes back to the sports analogy. On the tax side with the GST Council, the states and the Senate are forced to share the steering wheel. But on the election side, with this new law, if the PM and a cabinet minister can automatically outvote the opposition, isn't that essentially like letting the home team pick the referee for the championship game?
That is the fear. However, to understand the architecture of the state, we have to look at the tension impartially. The counter-argument from the Parliament is equally rooted in deep constitutional theory.
What is their defense?
Parliament argues that outsourcing core executive appointments to the judiciary is a massive overreach by the courts. They argue it undermines the sovereignty of the elected legislature. Their philosophical stance is that the power to govern and to appoint the administrators of that governance belongs to the elected representatives of the people, not to unelected judges.
We won the mandate to govern, so let us govern.
Exactly. It is a classic high-stakes battle over the separation of powers. Where does the power of the legislature end and the oversight of the judiciary begin?
It is endlessly fascinating to see how the architecture of a democracy is constantly being tested, pushed, and renegotiated in real time. But let's take a breath here. We've been deep in the weeds of heavy governance, constitutional theory, and geopolitical shockwaves. The May 2026 briefings also contain some incredible updates on science, global sports, and human achievement that are directly, physically impacting our daily lives.
It's important to zoom out. Let's start with what the medical community is calling the biggest biological story of the decade, the rise of GLP-1 drugs.
GLP-1. We hear this acronym everywhere. In pop culture, on social media, people talk about these drugs like Ozempic or Wegovy. Like, there's, a magic vanity shot for celebrities wanting to fit into a red carpet dress. But the briefings go deep into the actual biology of what this is.
To truly appreciate the breakthrough, we need a brief masterclass on the endocrine system. GLP-1 is not some synthetic alien chemical cooked up in a lab to melt fat. It stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. It is a natural incretin hormone produced right inside our own bodies.
Wait, slow down. If our bodies produce it naturally, why are millions of people injecting it?
To answer that, we have to look at where and how it's produced. GLP-1 is secreted mainly by specialized cells, called L cells, located in the lining of your small intestine. When you eat food and nutrients hit your small intestine, these L cells wake up and release the GLP-1 hormone into your bloodstream.
So it's like an alarm bell saying, hey, food has arrived.
Exactly. And once that alarm bell rings, GLP-1 performs 3 critical simultaneous functions. First, it travels to your pancreas and stimulates the beta cells to release insulin. Insulin is the key that unlocks your cells so they can absorb the glucose, the sugar from your blood to use for energy.
Okay, insulin goes up.
Second, it suppresses the alpha cells in the pancreas, stopping them from secreting a different hormone called glucagon. Glucagon's job is to tell your liver to dump stored sugar into the blood. So GLP-1 basically says, stop dumping sugar, we just ate some.
Smart. Very smart.
Third, and this is the mechanism crucial for weight management, it slows down gastric emptying. It physically slows the rate at which food leaves your stomach. And simultaneously, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and binds to receptors in the brain's appetite center, signaling massive satiety. It literally turns off the neurological desire to eat.
So it is the body's ultimate internal traffic cop for sugar metabolism and appetite. But if our bodies do this automatically, where does diabetes factor in?
We have to differentiate between the types of diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune condition usually starting early in life, the immune system mistakenly attacks and destroys the beta cells in the pancreas. The factory is burned down. The body simply stops producing insulin entirely, which is why type 1 patients require regular, lifelong insulin injections.
But type 2 diabetes, which is what these drugs were originally developed for, is completely different.
Very different. In type 2 diabetes, which is heavily influenced by lifestyle, obesity, and genetic factors, the pancreas is still making insulin. The factory is open, but the cells in the body become resistant to it. The insulin tries to unlock the cell door to let the sugar in, but the lock is jammed. The receptor is deaf.
So the sugar just builds up in the blood, causing all that damage.
Precisely. This is where GLP-1 receptor agonists, these massive blockbuster drugs, come in. They synthetically mimic that natural GLP-1 hormone, but they are engineered to last much longer in the bloodstream than the natural version, which degrades in minutes.
So you inject the mimic, and it artificially blasts the pancreas to pump out more insulin, stops the liver from dumping sugar, and paralyzes the stomach from emptying, so you just feel stuffed all day long.
It essentially hotwires the body's internal thermostat for metabolism. But what is truly groundbreaking in the May 2026 briefings isn't just the blood sugar control or the massive weight loss, it is the secondary effects.
What do you mean by secondary effects?
In medical science, researchers often go looking for one thing and discover something far more profound. These drugs were developed strictly to treat type 2 diabetes by controlling blood sugar. The weight loss was initially documented as a side effect. But as millions of people took these drugs, cardiologists started noticing something incredible. These GLP-1 medications unexpectedly and drastically reduce severe cardiovascular risks like heart attacks and strokes in many patients, independent of just the weight loss.
Wow, because it's reducing systemic inflammation.
Yes, and improving endothelial function in the blood vessels. It is completely redefining how the global medical community views and treats chronic metabolic disease. We are shifting the paradigm from just treating the symptom high blood sugar to treating the underlying metabolic dysfunction at a hormonal level.
It is a stunning triumph of biological engineering. And, speaking of human triumphs, the briefings gave a quick, really uplifting roundup of some global events from the spring of 2026 that remind us that despite all the geopolitical tension, life goes on. The world is gearing up for the 23rd edition of the FIFA World Cup.
The 2026 World Cup is a massive logistical undertaking. It is being jointly hosted by Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And for the first time, it features an expanded roster of 48 teams.
48 teams changes the whole dynamic. I mean, everyone remembers Argentina's incredible nail-biting win in Qatar back in 2022. But the statistic that jumped off the page for the 2026 qualifiers is the ultimate underdog story. Iraq has officially qualified to the World Cup for the first time in 40 years.
The last time they were in the tournament was 1986 in Mexico.
That is exactly the kind of sports story that just transcends politics. It unites an entire generation of a country that has been through unimaginable hardship.
It is a remarkable achievement. And speaking of achievements that push boundaries, the briefings also note significant historic milestones in space exploration occurring right now. We have the Artemis missions, highlighting the historic achievement of sending the first woman, Christina Koch, to the moon.
And it's not just the U.S. pushing the boundaries. The briefings highlight the collaborative joint space mission between Pakistan and China, featuring astronauts like Dawood, preparing for complex orbital operations.
It is a bizarre, deeply complex juxtaposition that defines the era we are analyzing.
It really is. On one hand, you have humanity working together to put a woman on the moon. We are finding biological cheat codes to cure metabolic diseases. Iraq is celebrating a World Cup berth. And on the exact same timeline, the sources mention the surreal, stark reality of global volatility, like the jarring incident on April 25th, 2026, where a violent attack occurred on Donald Trump right at the White House.
It is a world of extreme, soaring highs and terrifying structural tensions happening simultaneously.
And I think that brings us perfectly full circle. We started this deep dive talking about the X-ray machine versus the murky waters. We talked about tectonic plates, the invisible, slow-moving friction that eventually causes an earthquake on the surface. Today, drawing from those intensive May 2026 briefings, we've tried to map those fault lines for you.
We've looked at the high-stakes diplomatic plates shifting in Islamabad and the devastating K-shaped economic shockwaves originating from the Strait of Hormuz. We've examined the radical technological transformation of warfare with Neves and silent glide weapons and the desperate socio-economic interventions needed to combat the drug menace in Punjab.
We explored the structural friction within the government itself, cooperative federalism and tax reform, versus the bitter separation of powers battle over the election commission. And we marveled at the biological engineering of our own incretin hormones.
The goal today wasn't just to recite a list of events. It was to give you the architectural blueprints of why the world operates the way it does in this moment.
Exactly. But before we go, I want to toss it back to you. After synthesizing all of this, from diplomacy to glide weapons to biology, what is the thread that ties it all together?
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We talked extensively today about the Tara glide weapon, the autonomous drone swarms, the 10-centimeter precision of NAVAC. The briefings also briefly mentioned global law enforcement increasingly using AI-powered systems to track criminal networks.
Right. Everything is getting faster, smarter, and automated.
Exactly. So here's the question. If we are increasingly relying on artificial intelligence and autonomous technology to track our borders, to guide our weapons with centimeter precision, and to mediate our physical security, at what point does human decision-making become the bottleneck? With all its political biases, its slow bureaucratic compromises, and the endless debates we saw over the CEC appointment. Are we building a technological world that moves too fast for our own democratic and diplomatic institutions to handle?
Wow. That is a heavy, brilliant question to leave off on. Are the machines we built to protect us moving faster than the laws we built to govern us? Think about that as you watch the news this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the why beneath the what, and we will catch you next time.